What love is this that pays so dearly that the guilty one, may go free? Amazing love, oh what sacrifice, the Son of God given for me. My debt he pays, and my death denies, that I might live, that I might live. And so they watched him die, despised, rejected, but oh, the blood he shed flowed for me. Amazing love, oh what sacrifice, the Son of God given for me. My debt he pays, and my death he dies, that I might live, that I might live. And now this love of Christ shall flow like rivers. Come wash your guilt away. Live again. Amazing love, oh what sacrifice, the Son of God given for me. My debt he pays, and my death he dies, that I might live, that I might live, that I might live. Amazing love, oh what sacrifice, the Son of God given for me. My debt he pays, and my death he dies, that I might live, that I might live, that I might live.
Good morning and welcome to our half hour with Jesus. It really is lovely just to be able to meet with you this morning. I know we can't meet, at least to share this at the Salt Cellar as we normally would, but I hope that perhaps you are settled in. Perhaps you've got your coffee with you, or your drink. I've got my dad's army mug. It's showing it as a mirror image, I think, on the screen there. But it's got Corporal Jones, and it says, "Don't panic." And I guess that probably is the catchphrase for the times that we are facing. We won't go through all the rest of the Dad's Army characters and their particular catchphrases, but I think the thing is that for each one of those episodes, it always worked out for them in the end. So here we are. Don't panic. I don't know about you, whether you're managing to get out and about at all at the moment, or whether you're still pretty much stuck in. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Lynn and I went out, and as we were out, we met up with some old friends. It wasn't planned. We just happened to run into them at the garden centre that we'd gone out to pass a couple of hours in. You know what it's like when you meet somebody these days. You know, it's that sort of that awkward situation, isn't it? You know, you suddenly remember. You know, well, you know, we've got a social distance. You know, we've got to keep that 2 meters apart, and we shouldn't really be spending too long talking together, because we're not supposed to mingle with people from different households. And basically, you know, all we wanted to do was just to exchange hugs and say, "How are you? You know, how are things going with you? Perhaps, you know, let's go and get a coffee and catch up." But of course, we weren't able to do that. But it set me thinking, perhaps, about unexpected meetings. And I was thinking particularly about one meeting that was unexpected. And it's the story of Moses, if you remember Moses in the Bible. Except, of course, it was unexpected, as the meeting was unexpected as far as Moses was concerned, but it wasn't actually a meeting that happened just by chance. So there's Moses, if you imagine him, back somewhere at the back of beyond on Mount Horeb. He's a shepherd. He's got this great flock of sheep. His father belonged to his father-in-law. And as he's passing the time, he spots a shrub, a bush that's on fire, or appears to be on fire. And he decides to go over and investigate, to see what it is, to see what's going on. And as he does, God speaks to him. He calls Moses by name. Moses had a very interesting background. He'd been brought up in the royal household in Egypt, even though he himself was a Hebrew. His ancestors had migrated to Egypt to escape famine. They'd become immigrants, and as such, in Egypt, they'd become very much the underclass, looked down upon by the rest of the Egyptians, and eventually they become used as slave labor. The Egyptians looked down on them, they despised them because they're different. But yet, the Hebrews are essential because of the work that they do on the building projects. But the Egyptians become increasingly fearful of these Hebrews, because they say that their numbers are growing. They're having too many children, and if we're not careful, soon they'll outnumber us. And so the Pharaoh issues this order that all the newborn Hebrew baby boys are to be put to death. Moses escapes because the Pharaoh's daughter sees him apparently abandoned, and she brings him up. She adopts him and brings him up as her own son. So Moses has grown up in the royal court in Egypt. He's been privileged to have this life that, that where they eat the best food, they wear the best clothes, whatever he says is granted because he's brought up as a royal prince. But then one day, when he's grown up, he decides to go out and he decides he's going to see where his countrymen live, the Hebrews, and the sort of lives that they're living. And he sees one of the Egyptians beating one of the Hebrew slaves. And overcome with rage, Moses kills the Egyptian. The next day, Moses decides to go back again. But instead of being welcomed by the Hebrews, when he sees two of them having a fight and he tries to intervene, they turn on him and say, "Who are you to tell us what to do? Are you going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian yesterday?" And suddenly Moses realizes that his number's up and he has to flee. And he flees from Egypt and all the way to a place called Midian, where he settles, he marries, he has a family, and he starts a completely different life. But he's gone from this life of absolute privilege to that of being a nomadic sheep farmer. He doesn't even own the flocks that he's tending. They belong to his father-in-law. And there he stays for the next 40 years or so. As the years pass, I wonder, did Moses ever look back? Did he regret that rash action that had cost him so dearly? Did he wish he could go back and undo that and life would have been so different? I wonder how he felt about his fellow Hebrews that had rejected him. But all that was in the past. There could be no going back. He just got to make now the best of life, the life that he had. So we find him one day minding his own business, or at least minding his sheep out there on the mountainside as he did, day in, day out, year after year. But on this occasion, God meets with him. I guess Moses must have had the time on his hands, and perhaps he welcomed this curious sight that he saw, this bush that was on fire that didn't appear to be burning up. So he goes over to investigate, at least it's something to break the monotony. But this wasn't a chance encounter. God had already set this appointment up. And God calls to Moses, and he calls Moses to go back to Egypt, where he fled all those years before from, and to tell the Pharaoh to let the Hebrew slaves go free. Now, if you read through that story, Moses tries to come with every excuse he can think of, but in the end, he realizes that there's no point in arguing with God. Yeah, he could have turned his back, he could have fled from God, perhaps just as he'd fled from Egypt all those years before. And he wouldn't be the only one to try and do that. But in the end, he realizes that it's better to go with God than to turn away from him. And God promises to go with him. I'm just thinking about that, Moses' life, all those years, perhaps seemed wasted to him. God is able to use Moses' experience, that experience of growing up in the royal household. Moses, he speaks the language. He knows how to deal with court officials and protocols. But over the years, that once privileged and rash young man now has perhaps learned something of humility, perhaps something of patience and persistence. And I just wonder, with our lives perhaps being so strange at the moment, perhaps the routine of our lives that we've been used to having been disrupted, do we find ourselves perhaps in a similar position, looking back, reflecting what might have been? Perhaps we think back as perhaps what mistakes we may have made in life. Perhaps where we feel we may have failed or could have done things different. But the point from this story is the story of Moses, that God never writes us off. Many years later, there was a group of fishermen, and we find them just cleaning their equipment by the lakeside as Jesus passes by with the crowds trying to follow him. Those fishermen too were just going about their daily routine, their daily work. But Luke's gospel tells us that they'd been out all the previous night and they hadn't caught anything. When Jesus comes along and he borrows their boat and he uses it as a floating platform to speak to the crowds from. And here again, you see, it's just a thought. If those fishermen had had a successful night, if they caught lots of fish, they'd have probably been too busy to hang around to listen to Jesus and to hear what he had to say. They'd have been off to the market to try and sell their fish and make as much money as they could. And really what I want to share with you this morning is that the reason that so often that we don't hear God speaking to us is that we're just very often too busy in our lives to listen. And sometimes we need to be stilled to hear Christ's calling. And perhaps in times such as these, that's when we're going to hear that voice. God spoke to Moses just as he was going about the life that he'd become used to. Jesus called Peter and Andrew and James and John. As life, wasn't too good for them. They'd had a pretty fruitless night's work. And just as times are difficult now for us at the moment, perhaps we're just trying to get on with life as best we can. But God still speaks to us today if we take that time to listen. I guess that's why we're here this morning, isn't it? With the half hour with Jesus, just to hear what God might have to say to us. But sometimes when God speaks to us, it's like when the phone rings, isn't it? On our mobile phone, we've got that little button to either accept or decline. Or perhaps we just put the phone down and let it ring until it rings off. Or of course, we can pick it up and we can answer. We don't need a phone to speak to God. A simple prayer will do, just a response. No matter how mumbled or jumbled that might be, God still speaks to us today. And no matter what we think of our life, God never writes us off. I'd like just to offer a short prayer, if I could, with us. Lord, hear the prayer of our hearts. You know what's going on in our lives at this moment. That mixed up jumble of feelings, frustration and confusion, anxiety, disappointment, perhaps sadness. Are you speaking to all these things, Lord? You've promised that if we will walk with you, you'll go with us. You never write us off, Lord. Not only do you walk with us, You give us purpose in life. Perhaps because we've got the time to listen at the moment, Lord. May we hear your voice speaking into our lives. Amen.
Faithful one, so unchanging, ageless one, you're my rock of peace, Lord of all, I depend on you. I call out to you again and again. I call out to you again and again. You are my rock in times of trouble. You lift me up when I fall down. All through the storm, your love is the anchor. My hope is in you alone. Faithful one, so unchanging, ageless one, you're my rock of peace, Lord of all, I depend on you. I call out to you again and again. I call out to you again and again. You are my rock in times of trouble. You lift me up when I fall down. All through the storm, your love is the anchor. My hope is in you alone.
So, as we go out from our half hour and we go back into those daily lives that that we've been thinking of, I'd just like to share the words of the grace with you as a blessing as you go out, and whatever you face in this coming week, know that God is with you and God is there right beside you. And so may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.
He loves us.